Welcome, folks. Today, we're diving into a recent Fox News interview where the president went deep into discussions with Putin, deportation flights, Doge, trade imbalances, and, oh boy, rogue judges.
It's quite a mix of topics, isn't it? What really caught your attention from that conversation?
Well, right off the bat, there's the call with Vladimir Putin. The president mentioned that during that call there was an optimistic note about a ceasefire on energy and infrastructure, though not a full 30-day one.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to point out that if he was in charge, things would have gone differently, avoiding a lot of the tension.
Exactly. And he even described with some candor how the situation with guns pointed at each other wouldn't have escalated under his watch. But I'm curious, how much weight should we put on his take about that dialogue with Putin?
That's a good point. He painted it as a near 2-hour constructive conversation, emphasizing that he had a good handle on the situation despite all the tension. However, he also mentioned a lot about military encirclements in a way that's hyperbolic
Right.
at times. It almost feels like he's mixing diplomacy with theatrical flair.
For sure. And then there's the deportation flights topic. The president was very critical of what he saw as the mishandling of deporting what he called migrant criminals. It's a stark contrast to another issue about rogue judges.
Yeah, he was pretty blunt there too. He criticized judicial decisions that, in his view, obstructed his agenda, like when a judge ordered the reversal of those deportation flights. He argued that these rulings undermined the president's authority to secure the country. It's a tough stance, definitely sparking debate about the balance between judicial oversight and executive power.
Now, here's something that got my attention. A respectful pushback to that narrative might be warranted. I mean, don't you think it's a bit concerning to dismiss the court's decisions entirely as rogue, especially when there's a system of checks and balances in place?
I understand that perspective. However, he maintained that he'd never defied a court order except on very dubious cases. He argued that when you're looking at things like the deportation of dangerous criminals, it's a presidential job, not a judicial one. It definitely raises questions about the limits of executive power versus judicial independence.
Right? And then there's the dog bit. Talk about a curveball. I mean, discussing cryptocurrency in a political interview isn't something you'd expect.
Absolutely. It was almost as if he was blending traditional politics with modern buzz. He touched on Doge in that mix of economic commentary, which adds another layer to his talk about trade policies. It's like trying to capture every trending topic in one go.
Speaking of trade policies, he went into detail about the massive trade deficits, specifically piling on China, and even Canada wasn't spared from some harsh rhetoric.
Yeah, he brought up that $1 trillion plus deficit with China and criticized Canada for not living up to what they should as, in his words, the 51st estate. He even said Canada subsidizes them in various ways, and he wasn't having any of it. He certainly wasn't holding back on pointing fingers.
And what about his comments on domestic political terrorism? He made it clear that his view is that, if caught, radical acts, like those instigated against his allies, could be seen as the work of extremists with a political agenda.
Yes, he connected that to recent incidents involving property damage with Teslas and other events, suggesting they're politically motivated. It's a huge mix of national security and personal vendettas. He tied deep political ideology into that narrative.
Now, one of the moments that really stood out to me was his take on the judges and the judiciary. He argued that he knows the courts like no one else, and framed his claims of having dealt with crooked judges. Yet, I wonder, does that personal experience justify his sweeping generalizations about judicial misconduct?
I get what you're saying. It does sound like he's using his personal bandwidth as evidence to challenge the entire system. But he seems to believe that his past success with judicial decisions, like stopping Nord Stream 2, bolsters his claim. It's a mix of personal triumphs and a broader ideology that casts the judiciary as obstructive.
And it's interesting how all these themes loop together: diplomacy, trade imbalances, internal security, all tied into one overarching statement about making the country successful again.
Exactly. He consistently ties back to the idea of national strength, whether it's through international relationships with Russia and China, or through cracking down on what he sees as domestic inefficiencies. It's like he's setting the stage for a dramatic overhaul of both domestic and foreign policies. He leaves no stone unturned in his narrative.
One has to appreciate the showmanship in the way he connects so many diverse issues, even if some of the assertions require deeper analysis.
For sure, it's a blend of political strategy and theater, where every topic from international ceasefires to Doug is crafted to underscore his vision of change. And while some parts may be over the top, it's that kind of unfiltered style that clearly resonates with his base. There's a performance element in his approach that seeks to rally support.
And that performance, while compelling for some, does raise a respectful question. Are we seeing genuine policy insight or simply a diversionary tactic using hot topics?
I think that's the underlying debate here: policy substance versus style. The interview is packed with bold claims, some of which are more about rallying a sentiment than laying out detailed policy blueprints. It's a classic clash of rhetoric versus concrete strategy.
Overall, the conversation is a whirlwind of policy proposals, international maneuvers, and sharp critiques of domestic institutions. It's complex, but undeniably engaging.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder of how modern politics, with its rapid-fire issues, can blend serious international talks with a dose of modern cultural references. It's a lot to unpack, but we've hit many of the high notes here.
Right
It
on.
certainly gives us plenty to think about.